Alright, so Rosanna's skill is out. Everything else about her stats is like basic assault rifle things, supporter, burst to wind. I think the most pleasant thing about this Rosanna is actually her burst skill, which is basically like this damage taken 32% for 10 seconds, and that is pretty much like the same thing. I know the first thing that people have probably thought of is, hey, wait, this looks like blank, because blank actually gives 39% for 10 seconds of damage taken. So she's similar in that regard. And then she also has up to basically 15% of caster's attack, because it's 3% times 5 and lasts for 30 seconds every time you destroy an enemy part. So it's basically similar to like what Noir is. And again, there's that condition of destroys enemy parts, which is kind of synergizing alongside with Sakura. So again, it's gonna be boss very specific, and we need like a boss that is someone that we can have every probably 30 seconds. There's like one or two parts that we can destroy every 30 seconds. I think that's really the key for it. Although, to be fair, for this one, we do want to stack it up as soon as possible, and then it does constantly respawn. I think one example is Strain. Modernia is another one that kind of does respawn some parts, like especially the last solar raid where we had Modernia. Here's the thing, this damage to parts, you can pretty much like almost like ignore it. uh, for a lot of times, the damage to parts is not really that great. I mean, it's probably useful, obviously, you know, to help some of the units, but for the most part, it's not as good as say damage taken, or like attack damage buff, or like attack percentage increase. Like, it's just not as good because you know, this is just the damage that we do to parts, and if there's no parts in there, then it's kind of useless, right? So I think and also another thing, right, the sustained damage doesn't synergize well with damage to parts, because sustained damage is presumably it's gonna hit the boss directly, and it's not hitting any parts at all, it's hitting the boss directly. So it's reducing the boss's HP directly without like hitting the parts. So this damage to parts, I don't think is very synergistic to sustain damage. So there's a little bit of anti-synergy on that one. So again, the damage to parts is not really something to be more concerned of. Another thing is there is this 70% attack of sustained damage every 1 second for 15 seconds. So that's about like 1,000 attack over the course of 15 seconds every 30 seconds. And this basically every 30 seconds 1,000 attack is actually not that much. I just want to preface that to a lot of you. If we talk about like my summer helm, if going back to the solar raid last Gravedigger, I had Summer Helm, and I think she was doing about 1,000 plus attack if we combine skill 1 and skill 2 effects in the course of like 30 seconds, and she was doing pretty bad damage. So basically, like what I see here is like skill 2 is a very low priority. I don't think you need to level this up that much for Rosanna. Skill 1 is useful, I would say ranging between like level 4 to level 10, just for the scale of the attack, caster's attack. But again, keep in mind that she's also going to be a supporter, so a supporter has about 80% of an attacker's attack. So instead of like getting a 15% attack increase, assuming that they do have the same typing, you're actually just getting 12% attack instead, or assuming that they have the same like core level. So it's like if it's LB0 or like core 0, core 1 or something like that, then they would scale, a supporter scales about 80% of an attacker. So yeah, again, the main thing for Rosanna is the burst skill, and so this one is the absolute, like, okay, you gotta max it. And then the other thing is the sustained damage. That's the extra bonus that we really care about here, which kind of shoehorns her into a team that pretty much just has Sakura right now. And so the thing about this team is it does open up like another combination of Rosanna plus any sustained damage dealer, which right now is primarily Sakura. There are other sustained damage units like Nihilister, but like that doesn't, it doesn't synergize well, right? Like Nihilister's burst too also. So yeah, that's why she is kind of restrictive. But the way I kind of do see this is like the team building that we're gonna end up doing with her is, and then this time just imagine I'm using Summer Rosanna and Summer Sakura here, is something like this where we're using Helm to kind of like heal if you do end up needing a healer. If we don't end up needing a healer, so for example, you could totally just like use like Litter and then like say Maxwell here to just buff like the DPSs. Although typically for most people, I guess I would assume that they would have higher attack on their Maxwell, so it might end up buffing Moderna and Maxwell in this situation. But if somehow like you do have like a very invested or a lot of copies on your Summer Sakura, then you could totally make this something like this and maybe use Litter's cover recovery to take advantage of, because again, these units do benefit from attack buffs if you can somehow manipulate it where Maxwell will end up buffing Summer Sakura and Moderna. That is actually really good. So yeah, that's like one example in it, and then that can start opening up some other things. So assuming that, let's say we did use like the volume here for crit volume, actually I would say like with volume plus Moderna, and I would say with, instead of like Litter, I think when I kind of tested it, it was roughly similar or close to each other, especially with how Moderna has like a really high intense like critical damage. So this is like just one example of the team that we can totally use. But that does open up the bunnies, because right, for a good while now, a lot of people have been using Moderna with the bunnies, but then that is not the most efficient way, because you end up like bursting with Noir, and Noir doesn't really have that like much of a setup. Then you can start like using units that actually take advantage of them bursting into here, and you know, this kind of complicates some things, or it might actually end up like making us switch around things. I think the biggest dilemma that we have right now is just that there's three main burst one cooldown reduction, and then Dorothy for the other one, but the three main ones that you can use that are flexible at like pretty much like you can almost use in any team is Litter, Volume, Indie, Healer, Wife. But then they're kind of used in so many teams. Like you could use Tia Naga / Crown Naga, or the Bunnies, or then the new one, which is the Summer Sakura and Rosanna, or Crown plus Healer. Assuming that you did use Tia Naga there, then you're gonna end up like using Crown and Healer. And then there's the Rocket Launcher with like Rem and LaPlus, or like if you end up like using a multi DPS Snow White team. So for example, one example that I could give you is like what I used back in this solar raid, the most recent solar raid, where I ended up using Volume, Novel, Snow White, Maxwell, and Moderna. And technically I can replace Maxwell with Helm if I need a healer, or put in Litter instead and take advantage of the cover recovery. And here's the thing though, you guys might be wondering like, wait, how about like a healer and something like that? And I actually think that this is getting a lot more possible to actually, for some people, you know, if you have like core 7 or something, maybe, and maybe not necessarily core 7, but maybe like MLB. And here's what I've kind of like been thinking about also: the dolls. The second part of the skills of the dolls is that there's like covers max HP and damage taken reduction. And so I think like with taking advantage of like covering up, it is actually gonna be possible to completely just have no healer at all in some of these teams. And so that's just like one possibility on it. So that's just food for thought for some of you. But yeah, the letter D and volume are pretty flexible, and you pretty much like you can use it on like a lot of so many different team combinations and staples. And then the Dorothy team, you know, there's the Dorothy Crown Privity, which is like the unlimited ammo that's popular, or sometimes you end up like Dorothy plus like Privity, and then maybe like Marciana, or like the Biscuit Summer Anise team with another B2. And then the last solo raid, actually I did use Summer Helm as Dorothy plus Summer Helm, which kind of like works out, and it was actually like my strongest team out here. So I didn't use Privity here, and I ended up using Summer Helm on this team with Alice, Black Shadow, and Crown. So like, this is just to give an idea how so much flexibility now comes in. And again, the most troublesome right now is the letter volume D right now. And so if we end up like using Sakura and Rosanna with any of these units, then it does start being iffy, because there's so many, like, what kind of combinations do we end up like start using? But this does open up a possibility. For example, what if we just end up not using bunnies? Because here's the thing, last solo raid, the bunnies have been the lowest DPS for a lot of people. And actually, if I even like look into it, like the global world #1 is, yeah, the lowest DPS was the bunnies. And it is possible that eventually there's gonna be a point in time where we're just not gonna end up like not using the bunnies. It depends probably on the boss element, but there's probably gonna be possibilities on it. And maybe we might end up just building a sustained damage just because of that. It is possible. And again, it's because the doll system, the cover HP increase and damage reduction, and if you can actually like min-max your way through things, you can actually end up just trying to play around covering and trying to keep yourself alive. And then the sustain and the multipliers of the bunnies might end up just like not being as huge. I do foresee though still that it's going to be useful. The bunnies are still going to be useful for a lot of people. I'd say probably 95% of the players are still going to be probably using bunnies for a good number of while. But it's just that I'm just saying, you know, count your times, because yeah. Now, does that mean that Rosanna is gonna completely replace it? No, not necessarily, because again, this is more like she is opening up another set of team, which is the sustained damage that I'm talking about. Because there are so many teams right now that you can do, right? Like we have the Dorothy team, and that I mentioned earlier, and then the Crown team now, which is typically you slap in with Naga, and that team is pretty strong, especially if you want, like I could see on this upcoming solo raid that we're gonna have like a Naga in there, and then if it's not Naga, then it could be just any other healer if the boss doesn't have core. If the boss has core, Naga Crown is like pretty broken. And yeah. And then the Dorothy Privity, the unlimited ammo, and then yeah, Naga is technically a Tia Crown. I know there's some overlaps here, but I'm just talking about like showing you how the different team revolving around it. And technically, like you do have Naga Tia here, and then so you could end up like putting Crown with Dorothy and Privity, and then Dorothy can end up having just a Dorothy Privity with like, you know, Marciana or something like that, right? And then yeah, there's the Bunnies team, and then now we have the sustained damage team with like Rosanna and Sakura Summer. And then then there's like the different alternate team options where we have Tove and Bunny Soda probably as likely the core of the burst core shotgun team, and then like maybe you can start slapping in maid privity and then like add like Bunny Alice or somewhere there, but these are like probably optional and likely. Okay, what about the what if we need wind, right? So maybe we can replace Guilty instead of Leona, and that's something that will likely happen, and I can kind of foresee it, where we're basically just basing it off like the boss. Like boss is gonna be weak against wind, then yeah, we gotta slap in some wind character. And then there's the Snow White team, and the thing is, like, the good thing about this is a lot of people doesn't really want to use Snow White, right? And typically, like, this is also where we end up using regular Helm on Snow White. And so this is why, like, for those people that end up just maybe they don't want to use the Snow White team, they could totally like build this team instead. Or maybe they don't want to use the shotgun team, then they could, this is another team that you can totally build, right? Some are Rosanna and some are Sakura, right? That's just another team that is like another option for you. And then again, there's the rocket launcher, and then there's the electric team where you put in with Exia Treasure. So what does that mean? The Rosanna is just opening up like another team combo right now, and looking at the numbers that I was looking into, so I tried to put in without much of attack buffers, but if I compare it, like say if I put in litter, and I'm gonna average this out into 33% because of the buff, it does come out a little bit more on top if Scarlet, if we're using the standard Scarlet and Scarlet, Summer Anise, Dorothy, Privity, and Crown. Now here's the thing, if there is a option where I'm gonna remove litter for now, so if I don't have litter and say maybe I use volume, I didn't like put in the volume buff chance here just yet, but actually let me try just slapping in maybe 30% here, something like that. Actually, yeah, it doesn't provide that much. Volume doesn't provide much other than the DPS from cooldown reduction, but yeah, attack buff is pretty important. That's why I think litter would be good also for Summer Sakura / Summer Rosanna. And I can try to remove Crown on this Scarlet team, so let me try removing it. Like say, what if we ended up using Crown with some other team and we're using Dorothy Privity? I will actually say that if we did do that, then Summer Sakura will end up being out damaging Scarlet actually by 38%, and that's without using Crown, and that's using Summer Rosanna and Summer Sakura. So which is the kind of like the percentage that I am hoping for. Check on the based on like my previous video about the Summer Sakura, that's like the percentage that I kind of want, where I kind of consider it to be good enough as to consider her as DPS. So yeah, and there's gonna be a situation, right, because of how you're ordering things. What if you ended up using Crown and Naga, then you end up using Bunnies, and then so who's gonna be using the sustained damage, right? Like, so you can totally use like litter or volume in there, and it would actually perform more than say if you end up like using Dorothy plus Privity plus like say Marciana, where if you do that Marciana plus the electric units, Summer, Anise, and Scarlet. What I'm getting at is, for example, if I ended up probably putting in like Crown and Naga, I could totally see some unit to be using the sustained damage with volume and Summer Sakura and Rosanna, and that's something that I would actually consider instead of using the Dorothy team with Dorothy and Marciana and Electric and Privity, because some people are probably gonna use something like that. Oh, actually, yeah, we do need like I guess maybe Diesel for tanking or something like that, because we need the wind, right? In any case, this is just like an example of like the flip-flop that's kind of been happening, and the way I see it is Rosanna seems like it's pretty good. I think she is more of a side grade to the bunnies. That's kind of how I see it, because people are probably using Blank and Noir, and then so you can end up like using Rosanna and Helm, where you're using Helm as like your part of your healer. Ideally, obviously, you don't want to use Helm, but yeah, this is just an example. You can totally use other teams, other healers too, if you do end up like needing that heal. So for the sustain, could be Bunny Alice or whatever. Yeah, and this does open up, like, say if we did get another unit that is sustained damage, we don't know what the part 2 of summer is gonna be. We don't know if they're gonna try to build on top of it or completely do something else. I mean, to be fair, like last summer they did have like the water kind of idea, right, with Summer Mary and Summer Neon, but then kind of flip around with Summer Helm and Summer Anise. So this is just an idea, and here's one thing: sometimes they do follow up with this build, but where they're trying to set some things up, kind of like shotgun, right? How did they end up making shotgun relevant? Well, they just keep forcing to our throat, like releasing a unit after unit until it starts working. And so now it actually somehow kind of just works because we just keep getting it. And so I think that's the same thing with the sustained damage. If they ever want to do that, it really is depending to it. I would probably just like try to get at least one copy. The multiple copies is probably not as important because of the caster's attack supporter. It's 15%, and while that sounds great on paper, there's that condition also that destroys enemy part. So it's not like we're not gonna use her always, and in the times that we're probably gonna use her, it's gonna be like situational boss to boss. Oh, it's a gimmick of parts bossing damage. So yeah, the buff is pretty good. It is gonna put her to some degree as like, say, novel to some degree, because she is like a buffer slash debuffer damage taken. She doesn't have a defensive capability, it's more like offensive. But the good thing about it is a burst 20 seconds, and if you just want to open up your kind of like available units to use, then I think it's not bad to just get like one copy. That's kind of like what I would recommend for Rosanna slash Sakura. Now the way I see it though is, if you do get Sakura, I would highly recommend getting Rosanna. If you get Rosanna, I would highly recommend getting Sakura. Like if you don't get one, I feel like it's kind of like a waste of potential on it. So if you guys ever end up feeling like pulling on one, then I would say pull on the other. If you don't pull on one, then maybe you can try to skip on the other, because again, it's more about just like the team that you're building into, and there's so many other different teams, right? You have the shotgun, Snow White, rocket launcher, electric, and then you have the bunnies, the naga. So if you don't want to build the sustained damage team with the Rosanna and Sakura, then you can completely opt out on both of them and like just continue the others, and you're still gonna be fine. That's kind of how I see it. And yeah, so if you guys have any particular question, I mean, just like leave that comment on the section, and I'll be doing some little bit of testing on her. And also I'll try to be live earlier. There's ZZZ also coming soon, so we'll do that. hopefully based on the numbers that I've kind of pulled into, it's gonna be closer. I do have some bosses that I could test her with, test these things with, so it is actually okay for us to be able to like test hopefully a little bit of it. In any case, yeah, that's about it. I'll see you guys next stream then.